If you have been following this channel for a while, then you know that I've been very pessimistic on Ethereum's price development. In the end, we did see Ethereum performing worse than Bitcoin and worse than the rest of the market. The question is, will it continue to underperform? I think there might be a turnaround not so far in the future, and that's based on data most people are not considering. Ethereum is a very divisive cryptocurrency. Some people are long-term Ethereum bulls, others are always bashing on Ethereum. I try to be very opportunistic about things. When things are cheap, I try to buy them. When things are expensive, I try to stay away. Now, since beginning of the year, Ethereum underperformed Bitcoin by 40%. And it's not just since beginning of the year that we've got this bearish performance. It actually started off with the merge. That's this arrow over here. That's when Ethereum changed its tokenomics. That's when Ethereum moved from proof of work to proof of stake. Now let's zoom out a little bit more. Have a look at this. We once bottomed out in September and in December of 2019, and we're getting pretty close to that bottom. It's another underperformance versus BTC of roughly 20%. But if you were to keep this trading range, the potential upside from that bottom is a gain versus Bitcoin of 400%. Now here's the problem with Ethereum. Ethereum changed its narrative over time. At the beginning, it was all about smart contracts. It was all about Web3. It was about improving upon traditional finance. After a while, new layer ones came out, right? New blockchains that are cheaper, that are faster, for example, Solana. And so Ethereum had to look for a new story. That new story became ultrasound money, or in other words, Ethereum becoming an alternative store of value, because the supply tends to shrink. Sound money is simply money that doesn't expand in supply. Ultrasound money is money that even shrinks in supply. And so had Ethereum not made that move from proof of work to proof of stake, the annual inflation would have been 3.3%. Because of the tokenomics upgrade, it was only 0.05%. So in theory, Ethereum should have outperformed quite a bit since that move from proof of work to proof of stake. But in practice, we didn't see that happening, right? In practice, we saw Ethereum doing worse than Bitcoin by 75% since that move. So what exactly happened? What went wrong over here? I think Ethereum cannot compete with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the hardest of the monies. Bitcoin has been around for a long time, and Bitcoin doesn't have a lot of updates to its protocol, especially the tokenomics. They are 100% stable. Ethereum doesn't have that. Ethereum has uncertainty because of its updates. Thus, if you simply just want to store money, Bitcoin tends to be the better option. Now, this is Ethereum relative to Bitcoin. We've got a very similar chart. This is the Ethereum dominance. So how much of all of cryptocurrency's market cap is now in Ethereum, and we see a very similar bottom. And here we might already find the floor after an underperformance versus the rest of crypto of only 10%. So the potential risk versus reward already looks pretty good. Currently, the Ethereum dominance is at roughly 8%. But is that justified? I'm not so sure, because when we look at DeFi Llama, the total value locked of decentralized finance capital across various chains, including Solana and the Binance Smart Chain and Tron, etc., Ethereum still has a market share of 52%. Should the Ethereum dominance really be 8% when the total value locked, the capital on chain, is more than 50? I'm not so sure. It might be justified if people expect that Ethereum continues to shrink very rapidly. But we don't see that anymore in the staking data. So here's one of the major reasons why I was pessimistic regarding the Ethereum price performance. It's the staked Ethereum over time. As more Ethereum gets staked and gets locked up, the selling pressure on Ethereum tends to slow down, right? This is all supply that doesn't get sold because it's just locked up. And in the last year, we didn't see how the number of staked Ethereum grew anymore. We just went flat. We even tended to trend downwards a bit. That of course means that the minted Ethereum all gets sold off, and that there's a risk that even some of that staked Ethereum continues to get unstaked and get sold off. But it seems like the negative trend starts to somewhat turn around again. We seem to have hit a plateau And what used to look like a potentially falling chart now has stabilized. There's a lot of correlation in the price movements between Ethereum and the altcoin market. When Ethereum goes up, then the altcoins tend to go up as well. When Ethereum goes down, the altcoins tend to go down as well. Most people think that it's Bitcoin that dictates the altcoin prices, but actually there's more correlation, more connection between the price movements of Ethereum versus the altcoins versus Bitcoin and the altcoins. It's actually Ethereum that dictates the altcoin price movement. And when we look at the altcoins as a fraction of all of crypto, so we look at the others dominance, that's all the altcoins that are not in the top 10 as a fraction of the entire cryptocurrency market cap, then we get to this chart. Now those two curved lines are the same. They are simply just placed at different levels. And they show very nicely how those bottoms align pretty well, but also how those tops align quite nicely. And this chart tells us a story that the altcoins might be very much depressed at the current price level, that they could potentially outperform the rest of crypto by 140%. Will this happen tomorrow? Will this happen this week? Probably not. But when Ethereum hits those bottoms over here, there's at least the chance of a short-term bounce. I am personally still making money by betting on falling altcoins in this current market, but I am cautious. I'm very selective in the altcoins that I'm shorting, and I'm also not going in there with 5x or 10x leverage. There is the potential for a bounce. And yes, the current momentum is still very negative for Ethereum. It's not as negative for the alts right now, but there is a chance for a recovery. In the end, it's all about potential risk versus reward. And if we break this support of 2019 and we actually fall lower, then all hell might break loose. Then we're likely going to see some crypto institutions failing as well. And that then creates a whole new bear market where Bitcoin can go to 40K, maybe even 30K. Those are levels nobody is currently discussing, but they're definitely on the cards. But right now, everything still looks healthy. It seems like we might stay in this long-term trading range. We are already seeing how the selling pressure through the Ethereum ETFs tends to decline. So since February of this year, we mainly saw outflows from the Ethereum ETF. So this was selling pressure, depressing the price, but this tends to now slow down. Now the Bitcoin ETF is better. The Bitcoin ETF does see inflows, as in supply of Bitcoin does get scooped up at the moment. We are not seeing this for Ethereum yet, but let's just keep observing. This could flip in a few weeks, potentially a few months. Ethereum is very cheap and it's far from being a dead chain, right? A lot of real world assets are still directly convertible on Ethereum. Most stablecoins get issued directly on Ethereum and get then transferred into fiat currency once they get minted or redeemed. Here's the number of Ethereum transactions over time. And yes, it's not necessarily growing that much anymore in the last 4 years or so, but it is still continued at a high level. Here's the number of active addresses on Ethereum. Same story. Here's the number of new addresses. Again, we're simply just on a plateaued level. And does that really justify a movement like this of Ethereum dominance going maybe even to 4% or to 2%? I don't think so. The on-chain volume on Ethereum measured in US dollars, that's relatively low, but this always goes up and down in massive waves because of two effects, right? We've got the asset prices that go up during a bull run, and we've also got the trading volume that goes up during a bull run. When we go bearish, we tend to see both numbers declining. And of course, we want to buy Ethereum when this is rather low, and we want to sell this when this is rather high. And we are now approaching the lower levels again. Another way to look at this is to see how busy the network is, right? How expensive is the gas fee? How much does it cost to perform a transaction on Ethereum? When this is very high, the market tends to be heated. It might make sense to sell. When this is very low, very few people have Ethereum on the radar. And then it might make sense to buy. And so currently we are very cheap. We can perform an average transaction on Ethereum for less than $1. And during peak times, this goes to $20, potentially even $40 on average for a day. We also want to buy when most people are in losses, right? We don't want to sell when everybody is already in gains. We want to buy when people are giving up. And currently half of Ethereum supply is in losses. Yes, we have seen times where even 75% had been in losses, so there is still more downside, as we've already discussed over here with Ethereum relative to Bitcoin and over here with Ethereum's dominance. But we've also seen turnarounds at those kind of levels. I am personally not positioning myself in either direction for Ethereum right now. I'm not buying the bottom now because we could fall a bit further, but I'm also not betting on falling prices, again, because risk versus reward doesn't really justify continuing to bet on falling prices. I want to see a clear bottom on most charts. That's when I start dollar cost averaging in. Now, when things don't look that great, when most altcoins are going down and when they especially underperform versus Bitcoin, I think actually it's time to make money. It's not time to exit the market. This is what most people do. I think that bear markets are actually the easier markets to make profit. Because have a look at this screenshot here. This is a premium member that shorted a token with a modest leverage of 3x and that made 25%. This is his message, tagging me, I made my first profit, thanks. I'm not sharing the exact asset because we are still betting on falling prices of that asset. Again, there are some very weak altcoins that sometimes pump that we can then short, where we can make very easy profit during times like this. Most altcoins are now deflating. It's an always repeating story. What we've got over here is XRP relative to Bitcoin. So this is a relatively long-term chart starting in March of 2021. And whenever we see positive news, when all of attention goes to XRP, the price is rallying, but then sooner or later we do get our crashes. And it's relatively straightforward to make money with those crashes. We're simply looking at what currently pumped a lot, where didn't we see any new all-time highs, but where are we likely going to stay in the trading range, and then we just bet on falling prices. And especially when there's currently a bear market, when a price relative to Bitcoin goes down by 74%, we can make more than even just 74%, right? We can lever this up slightly as well. Or have a look at Dogecoin, right? The same story. Elon Musk tweets about Dogecoin, it goes up, and then afterwards the attention moves to the next token, and we just see a continued price decline. This is again 74%. We made money shorting Dogecoin, by the way. So I'm sharing all the trades that I do betting on falling prices with all the premium members. There are also alternative ways where we don't have to be that active, right? There are some altcoins that are that bad in tokenomics, where the supply is increasing that quickly relative to the demand, that the underperformance relative to Bitcoin is pretty much just a straight line. So what we've got over here is Balancer relative to Bitcoin, and it simply just continues to go down. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this position here is because the tokenomics aren't as bad anymore compared to a few years ago, right? I was shorting this throughout the whole of 2024 and I've closed that short now. But the reason why charts like this exist, the reason why we can make money with this, is because the supply increases over time. But this is now Balancer, and a year ago we saw how the circulating supply would still go up by like 30-40% within a year. This is not anymore the case. So relatively speaking, Balancer doesn't expand that quickly anymore. That's why the underperformance is slowing down. That's why I'm now sharing this publicly on YouTube, right? I didn't share this on YouTube in 2023 and 2024. This is where I only shared this in premium. We really have to be realistic about the market. I believe strongly that the long term wins the game. It's always about being consistent. It's always about beating the market over the long term and have proper risk management. Making money in crypto is not just about finding the next 100x meme coin. That can work with a lot of research during a bull run, and when we've got a lot of influencers that all coordinate each other that then push up the price. But in a bear market, that doesn't work. When there's no new investors joining, that's not the way to make money. I mean, just have a look at this. This is the top 100 tokens. And what we've got over here is Bitcoin, and this is ordered by the performance in the last year. We've got 16 altcoins that outperformed Bitcoin in the last year. 2 of those altcoins, by the way, are gold derivatives. So this is just the gold price going up. So in the end, we've only got 14 out of the top 100 cryptocurrencies that did better than Bitcoin. The vast majority of altcoins did much worse than Bitcoin. And that happened during a period where Bitcoin actually went up. Bitcoin during the time period went up by 25% almost. This is something most people don't understand. Most people think that when Bitcoin is going up by 25%, that the altcoins in theory should go up even more because they are smaller in market cap, they are more volatile, they are somewhat of a levered Bitcoin, but that's only true to a degree. Bitcoin can go up by 25% 25% in a year, and still the vast majority of altcoins does worse than BTC. So instead of trying to find the next 10x meme coin, when it's all just player versus player and when no new people enter the space, instead of trying to beat the impossible game, why not get the odds in our favor, right? When more than 80% of altcoins in the top 100 do worse than Bitcoin, why not bet on that? Why not bet on the 80% doing worse than BTC and make money with that? That's personally what I currently do, and that's also what the premium members are doing. That's how short-term gains like this happen, while the vast majority of people are just losing. Now, I have not seen any other influencer being that transparent about their own performance, but I want to share what kind of performance I make, and I also want to share this over time, as in not just I have made X%, but I want to share how volatile the game actually is. Crypto trading is a game of both luck and skill. And the longer we are engaged, the more trades we do, the more the skill component will be stronger compared to the luck component, right? It's pretty much like in a casino. If you play versus a casino over the long term, you will lose money. You might win money short term, right? Because the luck is on your side, but over the long term, the odds, the expected value is what plays out. And so what we see over here is a scatter plot. How much did I outperform buying and holding Bitcoin every single month in the last 3.5 years? Some months have been incredible outperformances over buying and holding Bitcoin, right? The very best month was over here with 25% outperformance, but we also had pretty poor months, like over here, an underperformance of 18%. So the thing is fluctuating. What we've got as a dotted line here is a 12-month moving average. Most 12-month averages have been positive. When we average out all of those data points, we come to 2.1% per month. So in other words, on average, I make alpha over buying and holding of 2.1% per month. So when we compound this, it's a bit over 25% per year. Now, is this enough? Depends on how much you're betting, right? If you only have $100 to invest, it doesn't matter. But if you've got $10,000, maybe even more than that, it does matter, because again, this comes on top of Bitcoin's performance. And so here's what I believe Bitcoin will do over the long term. Instead of just looking at the direct prices, I prefer to look at the realized price, so the average cost basis. Over time, the current price is hovering around that realized price, right, the average cost basis, but the cost basis itself tends to increase quite steadily. And this increase over the last few years was roughly 25% per annum, 30 to 25%. I'm rather conservative, I say 25%. So we've got a bit over 25% per annum from trading. We've got a bit over 25% per annum from just buying and holding Bitcoin. So compounding this again is more than 50% per annum. If you've got more than $10,000 and you put this into 50% per annum long term over the next 3-4 years, that kind of money does matter, right? Isn't that better than trying to gamble it all away with meme coins? Meme coins are ultra risky, and that's why most people just put a few $100 in them, maybe $1,000 here and there. But if you've got a strategy that's somewhat limited in risk and where you have a long-term track record, then putting in more money, allocating more of the overall wealth towards such a portfolio does make sense, right? Then we can play in the tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands. We don't have to just bet $100. Now, everything I've just explained is in more detail in the premium membership in the tutorial section. There's more than 100 premium tutorials in the membership, and it's not just about shorting, it's not just about betting on falling prices, it's also about risk management, about asset allocation, about on-chain analytics, etc. Besides the tutorials, I also share, of course, what kind of trades I do, so that you can simply just copy trade me, right? You don't have to go into every single altcoin in detail all the time. I dare to say that most crypto communities probably lost money in the last few weeks, and I don't think that's true for the premium membership here. I do believe that the vast majority of our members made money because we were prepared. So feel free to check it out. It's currently $125 per month. There's also a 1-week money back guarantee, so in case you don't like premium, just message me within the first week and I'll refund you 100%. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish videos regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well, helps the channel grow. See you again on YouTube, or see you in premium. Cheers!